Hey guys, my name is Michael, and welcome to a special Skinwalker edition to Reddit No Sleep Stories. This video will be done in a quiet voice and in a long format, so try to relax and go to sleep. Without further ado, let's get into these Reddit No Sleep Stories. Story 1. I'm writing this now as a call for help. I'm desperate and don't know what to do. My name is Michael. I own a dairy farm in the Great Plains near a Navajo reservation, along with my brother. The farm was built by our parents before we were born, and it was passed down to us after their death. It's a pretty big farm, and it has 2 barns, a well, and a house, where we spend most of our free time. Although I've always dreaded this place, because it's the place where our parents died, or at least where they were found. My parents died when we were both 19. Their bodies were found mutilated in the well. There was nothing stolen or destroyed. If not for the blood trail leading to the well, we would have never found them. The case was passed down as a murder, but they never had any suspects, and me and my brother were too ravaged by the events to think about it. Years passed and we forgot about the event. Well, until 2 weeks ago. We were gathering food for the cows using an old tractor. It was pretty dark, but we didn't use the headlights because the battery was too old, and it couldn't stand them being on for too long. As I was loading up the food, I heard my mom's voice for me from behind some bushes. "Michael, it's been too long. Come to me." But it sounded weird, as if it was spoken through an old radio. I was terrified. I looked at my brother, and he was as white as snow. I whispered to him to turn on the headlights in the direction of the voice. What lay before our eyes made my knees weak. It was a coyote, but its eyes were pitch black, and it was standing on its back legs. I jumped into the tractor, and we noped our way out of there as fast as we could. We arrived at the house and locked the doors. That's the moment when I passed out. I woke up in the middle of the night. I thought all that just happened was a dream, but then I saw my brother telling me to stay quiet and pointing his shotgun at the door. Then I hear it again. "Michael, I'm here, my dear." Then it started to knock softly on the door. That didn't last very long, though. The knocking turned into banging. Then my brother started looking through the window at the thing. It realized we were looking at it and let out the most horrific screech I'd ever heard before it ran off. An hour later, it started again, the voice and the knocking. I've searched up on the internet, and I've learned that they are called Skinwalkers. Evil Navajo men that sold their soul. Calling their name supposedly attracts them. I hope writing this doesn't trigger them. My brother wants to go outside and face it. I'm afraid we won't see the light of day again. Please, help us. Story 2. Let me start off by saying that my wife doesn't believe in paranormal entities or anything of that nature. We have 3 cats, and one of them likes to rebel. They jump onto the couch and meow at the top of their lungs, just looking for attention. He does this throughout the night, and it's a regular occasion. Last night, after a few beers and video games, I decided it was time to head to bed with my wife. When I woke up that morning, my wife was basically attached to me with wide eyes and a nervous look on her face. I asked her what was wrong, and she proceeded to tell me what happened last night. She said that around 2:50 in the morning, she woke up to a noise that sounded like one of our cats downstairs meowing, unusually loud. After giving herself a few seconds to perk up and fully pay attention, she said that the meows sounded more like people trying to mimic a cat, and it kept saying hello. After meowing for 2 to 3 minutes, a loud bang came out of our door, and then a notification went off for motion sensor at our front door. When she told me this, I checked my phone, and sure enough, there was a notification for motion detected at 2:52. I asked her why she didn't wake me up so I could grab my gun. She said she was frozen in fear and didn't want it to hear her make a noise. We're out running errands while I'm typing this. Something made me uncomfortable about her story. Last night I set a home security alarm around 9 p.m. and we didn't turn it off till we walked the dog this morning. To make things worse, we had slept with all the animals in the room, and the door was closed, so whatever was in our house or outside the front door was not one of our animals. Obviously, the first thing that came to mind was a skinwalker, but maybe I was just paranoid. I checked all the rooms in the house after I got up. I'm not sure what I would have done anyways. It was very odd that my wife was scared so badly by something she doesn't necessarily believe in. We bought this house brand new, so no one's lived here before. When I'm home alone, I do feel like I'm being watched, or something's always walking directly behind me. My wife also says that the house has given her chills since we moved in. Something is just off about it. We just got home, and I went to hang up one of my shirts in the master bedroom closet when I noticed that one of the boards that covered the attic access had been shifted a little. When I asked my wife about it, she said that she had never been up there and the builders would have placed it back in the original place before we made the purchase. I'm generally getting anxious just thinking about what could have gone on. Has anyone had an experience like this? Or similar at least. We're going to my mother-in-law's to get some sage. My wife says burning it should keep whatever's around our house away. Story 3. The story I'm about to tell you happened a few months ago. It still chills me to the bone. Never would I have thought something like this would have happened to me, but yet, it did. I turned on the TV and walked into the kitchen. The microwave started beeping, meaning my bag of popcorn was done cooking. I took it out, grabbed the butter from the counter, and poured it on. The butter sizzled down through the kernels to the bottom of the bag. I went over to the couch and sat down. The TV was turned to the breaking news report. Hundreds of dogs from all over Wuhan, New Mexico, seemed to have suddenly gone missing. The Nevada Department of Conservation and Natural Resources said that they were looking into why the disappearances are occurring. More on this at 12, said the newscaster. I threw my bottle of uneaten popcorn in the trash and decided to go to bed. It was getting pretty late and I had a meeting early in the morning. I went upstairs and into my room. My dog Leica, a large golden retriever, was laying on the ground. She looked up at me with sad dog eyes before drooping her head down onto the carpet. "Hey, buddy," I said. "What's the matter?" Of course, my dog was just laying there aimlessly, staring at the wall. I shrugged and went into the bathroom to get ready for bed. I hopped into a quick shower, brushed my teeth, and climbed into bed. Staring up at the ceiling, I emptied my mind and drifted off to sleep. A loud pounding on my door jolted me awake. I shot upright and looked over at the clock, 3:33 a.m. "God damn it," I muttered as I pulled the covers off. I looked over at the floor where Leica was laying only to see it was now vacant. I sighed and walked over to the open door into the hallway. It was dark, and not because no lights were on. Something felt off. The air felt thicker, no, heavier than normal. I rounded the corner to the stairs when I was abruptly hit with an awful smell. It smelled like rotten meat. I pulled my shirt off over my face and covered my nose, but I could still smell it. I walked down the stairs and looked around for Leica, but she was nowhere to be seen. Confused, I walked over and opened the large front door. Just as I was about to open it, something stopped me. I felt a chill run down the back of my neck, all the way to my spine. I shuddered and opened the door. There was no one there. I looked around my empty front yard. Then I stepped out and scanned the tree line in the back of the yard. There was nothing out there. Slowly, I closed the front door and stepped back inside. As I turned around, I was surprised to see Leica suddenly standing at the door. I leaned down to pet her, but stopped. There was something off about her. I couldn't tell what it was at first, but then I started to notice. Her ears were standing straight up, which she never does. Drool and slobber poured from her open mouth, which revealed her jagged, pointed teeth, which appeared sharper than normal. I looked at her eyes. Something wasn't right about them. They looked dark and empty, but most noticeably, they looked human. She began to bark and I stepped back. Tripping, I fell onto the ground and scuttled backwards. Her barks echoed through the house. It sounded off, almost as if her barks, but at the same time, there was something deeper sounding about them as well. Something not natural. Something demonic. Suddenly her head snapped sharply left and she looked at me. She looked right at me with those black, lifeless eyes. Then as soon as she appeared, Laka was gone. She stood up, looked at the door, then back at me, before wandering down the hallway towards the kitchen. Terrified, I ran upstairs and closed the door. I walked past Laka, now lying on the floor of my room, and got back into bed to go to sleep. It wasn't until I started to drift off to sleep when I realized I had seen Laka go down the hall, not into my room. Whenever I had seen her downstairs, that was not my dog. It was something else entirely. Fast forward 6 months, one of my clients, Dr. Ashton Diggins, who was a Native American man from the local Navajo tribe, came into work one Monday morning afternoon, before we had started talking business. I had him introduce himself to me and told me a few stories about himself. One of the stories he told me caught my attention. He told me a story about an encounter he had with a tribal creature known as Skinwalker. He said that these creatures, Skinwalkers, were evil creatures summoned by Navajo witches that had the ability to transform into any animal they pleased. He also described the awful, wretched odor that they gave off. I was shocked, now positive that I had an encounter with a Skinwalker that one fateful night. I jumped back from my desk, running to the bathroom. I had no clue what to do. Until this point, I had been told my whole life that monsters aren't real. Now I know, just not true, monsters are real. All I have to do now is know where to look. Story 4. The dark room was filled with whirling sounds of hard disks and pale blue glow computer monitors. An occasional burst from one of the walkie-talkies at the charging station would break the silence between me and the other security guards. He was trying to keep his eyes open, unsuccessfully. "Doesn't anything interesting ever happen around here?" I asked Peter, my new supervisor. "I mean, I figured most of the rumors were bogus, but isn't anything about this place real? Skinwalkers? Glowing orbs? You gotta have a few stories about it, at least." He had his feet up on the desk in the security office, and several dozen monitors showing different camera angles of the property were arranged before us. The billionaire who owned the ranch had spared no expense trying to capture the paranormal presence of Skinwalker Ranch on camera. But so far, from what I understood, it had been completely unsuccessful. "You watch too many History Channel specials, kid," he said, barely opening his eyes looking at me. I realized he was falling asleep. "There's nothing here but a rich guy with way too much money and an army of unpaid accolades like you and me. We're out here busting our asses to document a whole lot of nothing." "So what's with the body armor and the tasers and all the security equipment? I'm surprised they don't have us packing up heat with all this stuff we had to strap to us. We look like SWAT officers, which was completely ridiculous considering our job description mostly involves eating boxed lunches and trying not to bore ourselves to death." "Dude, shut up and quit asking so many questions. One day the old man will get wiser that ET ain't coming. But until then, just enjoy the gravy train, okay?" I grunted in agreement and sat, watching the monitors as Peter began to snore. Looking at the time, I saw it was past 3 a.m., only around 4 hours until the morning shift arrives. But this was the hardest time of the night to stay awake. I needed another cup of coffee or I would be sound asleep like Peter. And at least one of us had to keep an eye out for the boss. There was no way of knowing when the old eccentric billionaire would come wandering over for a look at the video feeds. And to make sure, he has hired goons with bright eyes and bushy tails, been known to pop in for supervised visits. Since I needed the job and couldn't afford to lose, I decided a fresh cup of coffee was in order. I snuck out of the security office and went into the adjoining room, where a single-serve coffee machine was plugged into the counter beside a mini fridge. Yawning, I stuck the pot in and snapped the mechanism closed, pressing the button for a large coffee. The machine began to churn and click and gargle, before spitting out some hot, steaming black brew. Taking the cup with me back into the security room, I was unsurprised to find Peter still snoring. I blew on the coffee and sat back down, looking at the monitors with bright eyes. Something caught my attention on the monitors to the right. The barn door was swinging open, snapping against the adjoining wall to the strong winds. It wasn't open before. "Peter, wake up! Why's the barn door open?" I had to shake him a few times and ask him questions again, but eventually he blinked his eyes open long enough to peer at the monitors. "Boss man's probably out polishing the ATVs or something. Why do you care? If there's a perimeter breach, it would have set off the alarms." "Cleaning the four-wheelers at 3 a.m.? Why would you do that?" Peter opened his eyes up all the way. "Yeah, you're right. It could be a test. He likes to do this sometimes to make sure we're not sleeping on the job. You go out there, newbie. I'll stay here and watch the feeds." He put his helmet over his eyes, and I could hear him resuming snoring a moment later. If it was the boss out there, I wasn't going to cover for Peter, I thought to myself. This guy was useless. It seemed like he didn't know the first thing about the property protection or security procedures. I was worried if something really did happen, he'd be useless, or do more harm than good in a crisis. Luckily, we were on a farm out in the middle of nowhere. Besides, nothing bad ever happens at Skinwalker Ranch, despite its reputation. Or so I thought. As I made my way out to the hallway of the farmhouse, which had been converted into a makeshift security compound, I found myself nervous about this. Something wasn't right. The idea that the boss was out in the barn at 3 a.m. testing our preparedness just didn't jive with me. But I suppose it was possible. Stepping out into the cold air night, I looked across the driveway at the barn. Not more than 100 yards away, the noise of an untethered door banging against the wood could be heard loudly now, and sounded to my ears like an omen of evil. A fat orange moon hung low into the sky, its awful gravity pulling me towards the red building. I found myself standing before the open door, the smell of hay wafting out from the inside. Closing the door and going back to the security office, I thought suddenly, whatever you do, don't step foot inside that barn. It's cursed, it's evil, stay out. A voice started murmuring from the shadows inside, as if in agreement. It sounded like a man, but the tone was hushed and quiet, difficult to understand. "Who's there?" I called out, taking my flashlight from my belt and shining it into the barn. No one answered, and the murmuring, chanting voice continued. "Peter, come in," I said on the radio, but as soon as the words escaped my lips, the walkie-talkie made a painful, high-pitched squeal of feedback and clicked loudly and was dead. "Hello?" I said again into the useless device. There was no response, and I had no way of knowing if he had heard me or not. It's probably just the boss trying to catch us slacking off, I thought to myself. Considering what Peter had said earlier, I would simply go inside, turn on the lights, then the rich owner would give me a pat on the back for my prompt action in response to the practice scenario. With that thought in mind, I entered the barn, my heart pounding. My body knew that my mind had not yet realized that I was in terrible danger. When I got inside the barn, the huge wooden door slammed shut behind me, and I knew I was in trouble. The murmuring, chanting thing in the darkness continued to deliberate, condescending as I turned and tried to get out. Clawing at the door and trying desperately to pull it open, one of my fingernails broke off and began to bleed. But I didn't notice it until later, as the adrenaline was pumping through my veins. A moment later, the door itself disappeared, its edges dissolving into the surrounding wood, and I backed away from it, terrified, looking at where it had been moments before. Such a thing was impossible, and yet it just happened before my eyes. I was trapped. Spinning around, I saw a thing in the shadows, still chanting, and now swaying back and forth. Its silhouette in the darkness reminded me of a shaman mixed with a wolfman, holding a wand or a scepter of some kind. The head of the scepter rattled and made awful fleshy sounds like teeth being shook in a sack made of skin. I tried not to listen to the thing the creatures were saying, as the words felt like worms crawling through my ears and into the gray matter, invading my thoughts. It was like an itch that I couldn't scratch, like a dozen black flies crawling on my brain, where I couldn't get them out with my fingers, taking occasional bites and samples of the local cuisine inside my head. "Get out of my head!" I heard myself screaming, but the wicked chant continued. The language was ancient and unknown. Clutching my skull, that horrible itching sensation of something worming its way into my mind continued, undeterred by my protest. I looked around and saw other black forms were in the barn with me. They looked like shadows at first, moving along the ground, like dark puddles spreading outwards from a surrounding oil spill. But then the thing began to take shape, rising up, shredding the two-dimensional form, and turning into a humanoid being with pitch-black features. The shadow creature moved slowly and deliberately, their mouth yawning open as they approached me with cautious faces. Their features were black holes within their black forms. They reached out towards me as they chanted things in the corner, raising up their hands like a preacher in a demonic praying session. Its voices raised higher and higher in volume. Red-painted walls all around me began to drip and bleed, revealing ancient druidic symbols which were carved deep into the woods underneath. Suddenly, the entire barn felt like a living thing, as if I was inside the belly of some great horrible beast which was inhaling and exhaling all around me. It was hot in the barn and humid, despite the chilly night air outside. The temperature was rising quickly, causing sweat to pour from my brow, running into my eyes and making the sting of pain as the shadow creature started to inspect me more closely. Each one took in turn, leaning in close, running its oily hands over me and judging me somehow. They made whispering noises back and forth, and a few took sample bites at me with shadowing mouths, leaving odd, non-bleeding wounds in my flesh. I cried out in pain each time. It seemed like they were shushing me as they raised their extremities to my face every noise I made. For some reason, I found myself ogling. Finally, one of them seemed to settle on taking me for themselves, as the chattering between the shadows stopped, and it smiled broadly, looking pleased with itself. The creature resembling a panther about to pounce on me as it leaned in towards me. It looked as if it was prepared to dive into my mouth to make a home inside my body permanently, when the huge barn door opened, which was previously banished, crashed in behind me. Glaring spotlights filled the space. I looked around to see the shadow things were dissipating. The shaman creature in the corner who had been chanting the wicked tones made a circular motion with his wand, and a black hole appeared in the wall, which he proceeded to exit through. It disappeared a second later, closing tightly behind him. Looking around, I saw the barn around me had no longer brightly painted red. It was odd and run down, dilapidated, and out of use. The ceiling was broken and sagging, revealing stars through a gaping hole above. "What the hell are you doing, kid?" one of the security guards asked me. "You're not supposed to be in here. Nobody's allowed in this building. It's not safe." "But Peter told me to come check it out. He was sleeping. I never told you to go in here. I hadn't even seen you since you disappeared earlier," said Peter, stepping out behind the other guards. "You're lucky these guys came in checking here and heard you screaming. This building is off limits. You can't see it, ready to fall down any second." "But I was with you just 10 minutes ago. You said..." "Don't put words in my mouth, kid. And don't make up stories. I didn't tell you to do anything. I turned around and you were gone. I figured you went home, to be honest. Thought maybe this job wasn't for you." I stuttered, unsure what to say or how to respond. I was sure that Peter had told me to go to the barn to check it out. Was I remembering wrong? Was I really tired? Or had I been spending my shift with an imposter? How was I supposed to know what was true? "Looks like we might have a 278, said one of the guards nervously. "The Skinwalkers are back." "Don't talk about them," snapped the supervisor. "You know the rules. You talk about them and then they will show up. Everyone get out now." "Buddy protocol. You need to go to the bathroom, take your buddy with you. You know the rules. Peter, we've got a code black by the sounds of it." Everyone drew their weapons, and I saw the other guards had guns with odd, futuristic attachments on the barrels. Strange, translucent white pieces that looked like oversized silencers. I hadn't seen any of these people when I arrived, the first half of my training shift. It turned out they lived on the property and were paid handsomely to be called to respond to any event that had occurred. "You gotta be kidding me. Skinwalkers, really?" my supervisor asked as he hustled inside. Peter looked unimpressed by all that was happening. I realized he didn't believe in anything supernatural. He was a die-hard skeptic of such things. "Guys, come on," he said dryly. "It's complete paranoia. The kid just panicked, attacked, or something. You don't really believe in this stuff, do you? Quiet. One of the heavily armored guards snarled at him. You don't know shit about what happened in this place. You only been here for a month. The boss should have known better than to let you train the new guy. Could have got himself killed. I felt queasy and numb all over when he said that, realizing it was true. If they hadn't arrived when they did, who knows what would have happened to me. Peter didn't say a word. Instead, he just made an annoyed sound and moved, following the rest of us, as the formation began to move towards the door to the farmhouse. We stayed back a little, as if in protest. Just as we were about to enter the house, I heard him stop a few yards away, muttering to himself. I paused and looked back, stopping where I was in the doorway as the rest of the team went inside. I heard the door open for him, hoping he was following me, but instead he began to yell in a loud, aggravated voice. You guys are a bunch of suckers, you know that? Skinwalkers, really? This place is just a busted up old ranch in the middle of nowhere. There's no curse, there's no monsters, watch. He turned around, facing the other direction. Oh, Skinwalkers, come and get me. Look at this fresh meat for the Skinwalkers. What, aren't you hungry? Looking back at us, he smiled and then started laughing mockingly at us. See, nothing happened. He made a surprised sound and turned suddenly, just as something began to appear from the shadows. It was large and hulking. It formed an inky blot against the starless moonlight sky. The sound it made was a deep growl, like a territorial wolf, only much, much larger. Its legs were long and stilted, giving it an unnatural look. Its fur was bare in places, manged and full of clumps and burrs. Nice doggy, Peter said, backing away as his hands extended outwards defensively. That's not a dog! Get inside the damn house now! Screamed a voice from over my shoulder, deafening me. Several other dark shapes emerged from the peripheries of my vision, crowding around Peter and surrounding him. He began to run, but it was too late. They leapt onto him, knocking him to the ground with a brutal impact. It was a highlight football tackle. His upper body began sent one direction, then his legs were slammed into the opposite angle, causing his body to contort and bend into two different ways. When he landed, he looked unable to breathe or speak, and I wondered if the wind had been knocked out of him or he'd broken his spine. I instinctively began to run towards him, thinking I could save him, but one of the nearby guards grabbed my arm and pulled me back. If not for that, I probably would have been dead. Squads! Firing position, the guy in the charge of the group yelled, and they all turned in formation. Meanwhile, the devil wolves were tearing Peter to pieces. One of them had its jaws around his face, and it was squeezing like a vice grip on his skull. The other one was shredding his torso with its teeth. Ready? Aim. Fire! The group of pseudo-soldiers around me started unleashing semi-automatic rifles rounds into the hellhounds, each one tracing a green trajectory which streaked across the sky like a tracer bullet. There was no immediate reaction from the beast at first. I thought they were making no impact, but then the dog-like creature started snapping and wincing at the bullets as they grazed by them. Don't let up! Keep up the pressure! Instead of retreating, the shadow-like creature snarled and began to stalk towards the group of us. The bullets were doing little to stop their advances, as if they were being sprayed by water pistols, and merely seemed to annoy them further. One leapt suddenly with lightning-quick speed, pouncing on the guard nearby. He screamed as the thing began to shred his Kevlar, cutting through the protective gear like warm butter with its claws. Peter was no longer moving or breathing, and the remaining guards were quickly losing their courage. Fall back! The leader of them shouted, and I hustled inside, this time not hesitating. He slammed the door shut and listened to the scream of the guards, who didn't make it back inside. The creatures didn't kill them quickly, though. They were left alive, dying slowly as the hellish wolves tortured them, making them scream for help in the attempt to draw us back outside to rescue them. After a while, I plugged my ears, unable to stand the sound of their dying screams one moment longer. They didn't stop until the sun came up, and by then the creatures were gone. You would think there would be some evidence that one of the security systems would have caught something, but the camera showed nothing the next day. I saw the tapes myself. They showed nothing but a peaceful farm until 3:30, when all of them went dead at the exact same instant. Authorities investigated the incident, and I gave a statement about what I'd seen, at least as accurate of a statement as I could, under those circumstances. The whole thing was written off as a wild animal attack, and once the dust settled, the whole team was letting go, fired for inaction during an event. Not that I ever wanted to go back again anyways. I'll never forget about that day, and what the guards had said about them showing up when you talk about them. Be careful if you hear this read out loud, because they might have heard you speak their name, and then they'll always show up when you talk about them. You might just not notice.